Foster Care Nation, listen up. Hey guys, this week we have a guest on with us, Carrie Bock, who happens to be a therapist at the Well Counseling Service in, I believe, southeastern Tennessee, if memory serves correct. There'll be a link down in the show notes. You can find her information there. She also has a podcast, Hope for Anxiety and OCD. And she's a foster and adoptive bio mom. I forget all the details of how many different ways she's involved with foster kids, but she's got a lot of great experience. I think you guys are going to love to hear this. So, sit back and get ready to take in a great story. On top of that, I just wanted to mention to you guys, if you have the moment and you feel led, do me a favor. Run over to either buymeacoffee.com/fostercare or patreon.com/fostercarenation. and drop us a couple of bucks to help us pay for this project right here. We provide this every week free. We don't charge for it. But if you have the opportunity, if you're looking for a way to help to be part of the solution, that would be so super helpful for us. So if you have a minute, take a jump over there and look at supporting the show at buymeacoffee.com/fostercare or patreon.com/fostercarenation. And if not, share this episode with a friend or with a colleague or any episode, really. We just want to get the conversation going and see how many more of the amazing listeners we have out there who we can convince to take that next step towards figuring out how they can support kids from hard places. Thanks, and enjoy the show. You can forget a lot of things, Foster Care Nation, but never forget this. You're listening to Unparalleled Studios.
Signal.
Foster Care Nation, listen up. This is
Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey.
strength for the powerless, courage for the fearful, hope and healing for wounded hearts. Hello and welcome back to Foster Care, an Unparalleled Journey with Jason
and Amanda.
And today we have for you a fellow podcaster and a therapist. We have Carrie Bock with us. Carrie has the Hope for Anxiety and OCD podcast. Carrie, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. Okay, I always love to talk to other podcasters, so let me nerd out for 30 seconds here. We were talking about all the, the work of editing and everything, and I am jealous because you have found a way to outsource your work, and I have not yet, because this whole process takes me a lot of extra time every friggin' month, and I'm not making any money to really put towards that. So I'm a little bit jealous that you're already there, and I'm not. But at the same time, you're talking about people on your podcast who are looking for some hope and for their anxiety and struggles with OCD. So what brought you into the place where you wanted to talk about those topics to people?
Wow. Well, probably similar to you. It was just a topic that not enough people were talking about. I'm sure that you probably feel similar about foster care. We need more people talking about those issues. And, as far as Christians that are struggling with some of these mental health conditions, I just saw a lot of people coming into my practice who were full of shame. They felt bad about struggling with anxiety and OCD. And I wanted to help give them hope and reduce some of that shame surrounding having those mental health conditions and struggling with them in the church. I wanted to let people know there's all kinds of different therapies that can help people who have anxiety and OCD. So we talk about things from a very clinical perspective and look at different therapy topics, but we also talk about the spiritual side of things. And sometimes I interview pastors, authors, and just everyday people who are struggling in their mental health journey and how they overcame certain things. So we cover a wide variety of issues, but I've really enjoyed it. I've been doing it for about a little over a year now.
Well, we also might have forgot to mention that you're a therapist as well. It's only just one more hat, right? Just one little extra piece of the puzzle. So you're a therapist who also has experience in the foster care world.
Right.
Now, I'm just going to say I am always just blown away when I meet somebody who has some experience in the world of therapy, who understands parts of the human brain that most people do not, who then chose to go on and take on the struggles of kids in care. So can you talk about that for just a minute and how those two have played together in your own experience?
Well, about 10 years ago, I was married to my first husband and felt just very passionate and called towards adoption. So through that process and that journey, really wanted to give a child a chance to have a family, maybe that wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise, or whose family wasn't able to care for them. And so that led us on the foster care journey. And it actually did not work out towards adoption for us. That wasn't to be a part of our story, but it was definitely a learning process. I learned quite a bit about the challenges and struggles of, parenting children that you feel very close to, but at the end of the day aren't yours. And you have to be able to accept that lack of control. So there was so much, I think, that it allowed me to empathize more with my clients who had children, because I didn't have any of my own biological children at the time. And it also allowed me to empathize with children and teens who were just in very challenging places, going through a lot of struggles. So I'm thankful for my experience of about, roughly about 2 years of being a foster parent.
So I'm curious, did you take in primarily younger kids, older kids? Did you have just run the full gamut?
So we were 2 to 12, and the youngest child that we had was almost 4 when she came to us, and the oldest child was 12.
That number scares me a little. I'm not going to lie.
12 years old?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it was rough, I think for that child, particularly because they had been in a couple different foster homes before us, and he had gotten acclimated and had friends in the area where the last foster home was, and we were a significant distance from that area, so there was loss of connections there. He had more freedom to do things because he had built up that trust, versus when he just came to us, we were still trying to get to know him and what would be good for him, and he didn't have necessarily relationships where he could go to the kid down the street and hang out at their house, those types of things. So that was a rough transition for him.
Oh, yeah. Not to mention, we've had several 12-year-olds in our house. I mean, what, 5 of them have come through that age group already of our own? And no, more than 5. A lot. How about that? A lot of kids. And so, that's a tough age anyways, puberty hits, pre-puberty, all that, the brain chemicals just dump in and do crazy things. And for us boys, that testosterone comes over half the brain and does brain damage. And I always laugh about that because I look at teenage boys and I'm like, do you have brain damage, son? What's wrong with you? Why would you even think to do that? That's, some of the stupid stuff that they do. You're like, something's wrong with you. You weren't this dumb a year ago. And the truth is, yeah, we do have brain damage. So you have to forgive us a little bit because that whole puberty time that's tough for us. So there's my excuse for being stupid all the time. Mom, if you're listening, there's my excuse for being a stupid teenager. I had a real good excuse for it all. But yeah, so that makes it a really tough time. Those kids go through that. And then you add the extra trauma of whatever happened to them.
Sure.
Because every story is different. And then that loss of a first family, that loss of that perfect Ward and June Cleaver ideal that everybody seems to think would have been if they hadn't been thrust into this situation. And so yeah, being willing to take in kids that are up to 12, that's something a lot of people are a bit nervous about doing.
Sure.
And I understand it. We tend to take kids younger than our youngest, mostly because we have a bunch of kids, the youngest 4 have been adopted through the system. And so they have their own traumas. And I don't need to bring in, number one, an older teen who has extra stuff that they haven't even dealt with that we're going to force them to deal with on top of that. Plus,
we also have a teen daughter, but we have found for our family what works well, and that's keeping our birth order. It doesn't make anybody feel like they lose their place.
Yeah.
And that's really big in our house with the traumas and things that we have.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Plus the last kid that they called me about was I want to say it was a 15-year-old male, And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work. And she's like, the worker, she started trying to sell me on this. And I'd be like, no, you don't understand. I have a 14-year-old daughter. I'm not bringing a 15-year-old boy into, no. She goes, I understand. Never mind.
That's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah,
yes, it is.
I mean, you have to think safety too. That's a big issue across the board. And it's not necessarily that you want to say no because your heart breaks. You don't want to ever have to say no, but there's times that you have to say no because you know what's best for your family. Yeah, but you also know by saying no, it's just one more person that said no to that kid.
Yeah, it's a tough part of that situation. So when you guys first were looking into getting into foster care, or fostering to adopt, how did you and your husband? I think you said your first husband, right? So how did you and he really approach it? Was that all your thoughts? Was that a joint effort? Was it, was it something you both wanted to get into?
No, it was really something that we had discussed even before we got married, was adoption. That was just something that we both really wanted and felt passionate about. And it seemed like the road towards foster care would be the least expensive way to adopt and possibly, the best process for us versus, for example, like going overseas and not necessarily having that relationship with the child before you proceed through with the adoption. At least with foster care, they're in your home. You're taking that time to gel as a family and to understand, like, how are these kids going to fit and those types of things. So for that, it seemed like the best, looking at the different ways of adopting, that seemed the best for us. We also didn't feel as connected as far as adopting an infant or a baby, because most people want to do that. They want to adopt younger kids. And we really felt like maybe we could give a sibling group like, 2 or 3 older kids a chance to stay together. Since we didn't already have children in our home, we had a little bit more flexibility and openness as far as placements that we could take, those types of things. So I think we were approved for 3 children at the time. And so that's kind of what we went with.
Well, I applaud you for your efforts there, because number one, raising a sibling group is difficult for sure. We've had a couple sibling groups come into our house. Several of them, actually. I think at this point I've lost track. Our 2 oldest that are adopted out of the system, they were a sibling group as well. But we were already parents. We already had 3 of them well underway, and we'd figured out those things, how to do that. And you guys are looking at stepping into it like right out the gate, Or do you have any background in child psychology, or do you deal mostly with adults?
Well, at the time, I was working with children and teens exclusively through counseling, and now I work primarily with adults. So I've shifted and kind of let go of a lot of the child and adolescent counseling as I've kind of progressed, and my business has changed a little bit. But at that time I was. But there's a big difference between having a child 1 hour at a time versus having a child 24/7. So we were not prepared for the parenting part of things just because I was a therapist and just because I had studied child development.
It at least gives you a little bit of understanding of that real reason why that 12-year-old boy acts like he doesn't have a brain anymore. So, gives you a little bit of a step, I guess, maybe a little help. Yeah, that's something else. So I know when I first saw your story, you guys had stepped in for the foster to adopt road.
Right.
And, you mentioned that like it looked like that was one of those things that looked like a good pathway to you, but it just did not work out.
Right.
Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Sure. So our first placement was 5-year-old and 8-year-old girls. And it seemed like they just really fit really well in our family. We were told by DCS that they were at legal risk, were the words that they used, of becoming, adoptable, of the parental rights being terminated. So everything seemed like a green light, like, okay, well, this is really great. This is, hopefully possibly the best of both worlds for them and for us, that this could really work out together. And unfortunately, in that situation, we really, in a sense, our rights were violated because we weren't told that there was a court date, even that DCS had gone to court, and there was a relative that they had been staying with. And essentially they lost, I can't remember what the term of the hearing is called, but they lost the hearing saying that they had the rights to remove the children from that relative that they were staying with temporarily. So that was a huge shock to us. Essentially, we got a call. I was at work. I got out of a meeting and I had this message from the DCS worker, like, you need to call us right now. I call up. She's like, I had no idea it was going to go this way. I would have told you had I known, or had we had any inkling that it was going to go this direction. And we need you to bring the girls down to the office, like, right now. I was like, right now? Like, I'm at work. They're at, school. I think it was actually kind of a half day, something of that nature, when we they were in the aftercare program, and we essentially had to put everything that they owned in whatever we could find, which unfortunately was some trash bags, and we just kind of put together clothes and toys and whatever they had and packed it all up, put it in the back of the car, and went and picked them up at daycare and said, hey, we're taking you back to the DCS office, and you're going to be going to live with this family member. So it was just a total shock for everyone involved. And that was a hard loss for us.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I don't think we've had that occur in our journey yet, anything quite like that. We tend to have always had more time to work through that in all of our situations. All of our kids have all been like, hey, one of the last girls who stayed with us, it was actually an ICPC case. And for anybody not familiar, ICPC is Interstate something Compact, which basically means they lived about, her bio mom was in our state, and that's how she ended up in foster care in our county area. I think it was the next county over, but in our district. And her parents lived across the line, because we live in Missouri. So they were in Illinois by about 20 miles. And because it was 20 miles away, they had to invoke this whole ICPC deal. And it's a lot of paperwork that goes from the worker up to the supervisor, up to the county manager, up to the state, then over to the other state. And then it filters down through that state to the worker over there. And it filters back and forth several times until they get it all worked out. And it took them almost 6 months to get this little girl moved, the 70 miles away from us that she was, because it was 20 miles over the state line.
Right.
And it was really difficult for her because, she wanted to be with her biological family, and, grandma and grandpa were good people. We met them several times. We did visits and all that. They were good people, had nothing wrong with them. We were never upset with them. But the system caused that to be a long, drawn out, unfortunate process. And so that's mostly what we've dealt with, is things like that. Never a real sudden, bring the kid in, they're leaving you today.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how hard that was to deal with whenever they show up and they just say, hey, by the way, you got to drop everything you're doing and play our game now. That's hard to even think about.
Yeah, and it was hard to communicate to the kids, because in their mind, they had already been told this relative can't take care of you, right? So we come in and we say, okay, well, you're going back to the office and you're going to go live with this relative. And they were like, but wait a minute, we were told that relative wasn't able to take care of us, and now we're being told we're going back with them. So that was something that was confusing for them. I can only imagine what that shock was like, because as when kids move, then it's oftentimes it's a different school. You're in a even if it's a close move, you end up in a different school zone, and now you're changing and disrupting that process and all of that.
Oh yeah. That's a lot of extra added trauma. So how many kids did you guys end up having come to stay with you for a while?
We had a total of 9 children over the, about 2-year period that we were foster parents.
9 is a lot in 2 years.
Yeah.
That's quite a bit. Did you have any other experiences like that?
We did. So we had a sibling group of 3 that came to us about a month before their termination of parental rights hearing. And DCS once again was convinced, these parents' rights are about to be taken away. We're going to, we have the case to show that this was, I think the allegation was severe abuse. There was, some severe abuse, and they're going to be terminated about a month. And so we're going to need an adoptive home for them because this other placement fell through, this long-term placement, they disrupted and they weren't going to adopt the children. So we're putting them in your home. And we thought, well, wow, that's a lot. That's really shocking. About a month, you're asking us to commit to adoption. That just seems really kind of rushed. And we're like, we don't know about that. They were actually really great kids. We enjoyed having them in our house. They were very bonded together as siblings, which I think helped them a lot be able to get through the trauma, was that they were able to really lean on each other. And in that situation, that was with the 12-year-old, and the 12-year-old ended up testifying at the termination of parental rights hearing. I actually, since I didn't have anything to contribute because they hadn't been in my home that long, they allowed me to sit through the whole trial. And I got to hear all of the allegations and the defense and so forth and so on. And I really believed that the judge made the right decision for those kids. And that was that, DCS lost again and they were reunited with their family system. The person that had abused them was gone by that time. And so they wouldn't have had contact with that person, in the family system. And I really felt at peace, okay, this is the right decision for them. But once again, it was also a very sudden move. And I had asked DCS, I said, okay, so because of our past situation, I said, so if you lose in court, if they go back to the family, is that kind of a sudden thing? Is it all at once? And they said, oh, well, they'll have to make arrangements and this and that. No, it was pretty much we're coming to get them and their stuff, and they're going to go back right now. So it was another very sudden transition. I think court got done towards the end of the day, maybe 4 to 5. And it was probably about an hour away from us. And since a couple of the kids were at daycare and the 12-year-old just kind of went with family right away. And then we picked up the other kids from daycare and they came and got all of the children and all of their stuff that evening. So that was another kind of very sudden and shocking thing, but they were happy to go back. They wanted to go back. So it was a little bit different in the sense that it was a much more positive transition, I felt like, than our first sudden transition.
Yeah, that's, wow. Those are always hard. Even on most of those situations, I think a slower transition would be the healthiest thing for the kids, a couple overnight stays and, and moving or overnight in a weekend or something like that, just to ease some way to ease that transition, because kids don't do transition well anyways.
Right.
Let's just be honest. They struggle through that because of the way their brains are wired. And so easing them into that is usually the best way to do it, in my opinion. But again, as I mentioned before, my psychology degree hanging on the wall over here was made by me with crayons, so they won't listen to my thoughts. So,
I mean, you mentioned something earlier, and it's that control. There's such a lack of control, and it's so out of your hands.
Right.
There's so many times that I walk away from dealings with Children's Division and just shake my head like I have no idea as to what's going on here. I'm so lost, and I'm so in the fog. And I hear that so often from foster parents, is that we just feel like we're not heard. We don't know what's going on. And it's a little aggravating, feeling lost. And there is definitely that loss of control.
Mm-hmm. There's a sense of powerlessness, of not being able to, you can advocate. That's probably not the right word that I want to use. You can advocate, but ultimately you're not in control of the outcome. So it's you can say your piece, but then DCS can come in and say, well, nope, but this is what we're doing, or a judge that may not have the whole story is well, this is my ruling and this is what's happening. And then you're kind of powerless at that point, and you've kind of done all that you can do. That's hard.
Oh yeah. Or you can sit after the hearing and you get up and walk out because they did not make a ruling on a family placement's desire to be, a family member's desire to be a placement, and sit for how many months did we wait before the judge made that ruling?
Oh my goodness, probably 5 to 7 months.
Yeah.
Wow.
He took a lot of time. And now that particular judge, we've had a lot of dealings with him. And, if Judge Frowley ever hears this and wants to come on the podcast, I'd love to talk to him, because Judge Frowley was friggin' awesome. He was a really good judge. And, he had kids from the foster system that he had himself adopted. He had a lot of experience, and he was one of the ones who was willing to always stand up for the rights of the kids. So, the fact that he took that long to make that decision was because it was a grandparent who wanted placement. And I think he made the right decision, and those kids are still with us today. So I won't really talk about the whys or anything there, but I understand why it was a hard decision for him to make. That was a really tough one, because I would be hard pressed to feel like I'd made the right decision if that was my job. So some of those situations are just super difficult and hard for them to come up with all the right answers at the right time. The legal system is full of mistakes. The legal system is full of complicated things. The foster care system, just like so many other systems that the government runs, the healthcare system, they're all broken. And we do what we can to do the best that we can do with what we have. And unfortunately, because we have humans involved, we will never get it all right. But it's super difficult to figure those out. So, did you guys have any placements that you look back on with a lot of fondness or memories of difficulties that you went through that really maybe bound you together a little bit?
Well, I think that as far as fondness, I think definitely our first placement with the 2 girls, there was a lot of fun that we had. There were good things that we were able to do. Really just kind of in that season of getting them settled in and ready for school. And unfortunately, they went back shortly after they started school, but there was a lot of preparation of, getting them the clothing they needed for school, the school supplies, getting connected in terms of our local foster care group and community, and being able to play with other kids at back to school functions and those types of things was a lot of fun. Enjoyed having I always think about holidays, I think, when I think about my foster children, because there were things that we celebrated. So when I think about the placement of the 3 children, I think about the 4th of July and how we went to the 4th of July celebration in town and had a lot of fun there. They were only there with us for about a month. So it was a very short period, but also just in terms of that process of trying to think about preparing them for going back to school as well, and what were they going to need, and trying to figure out where they were educationally, as far as if they were on grade level or not, those types of things. So good memories, I think, there. And our most challenging placement was the little girl who was 4 years old at the time. She was a very challenging placement. And there were a lot of things circumstantially necessarily that we didn't realize going into taking that placement, and that made it more complex and complicated.
Yeah, a lot of those things that we don't always understand. That's part of the complications of the system, I think, is that this kid shows up and you have the little bit of the background that somebody told somebody that a caseworker kind of knows, and they share as much with you as they think they should. And sometimes that's not much of the story. And we're handed a kid who has a big story that we don't know anything at all about.
Right. And watch out when they say no behavior problems, because of course they have no behavior problems when they're being raised by a family member and being given things that they want. And in her case, she was somewhat the little princess and spoiled, and in that dynamic. And when she came to us, then there were rules and standards, and you couldn't eat peanut butter and jelly 3 times a day for every meal. So that was, there were some some food battles a little bit over that. We did let her eat a lot of peanut butter and jelly, but we also had to say, you need to eat a variety of other foods as well. She ended up having a huge growth spurt when she was with us, probably because we got her to eat a variety of different foods. But that was, I remember them telling us, oh, there's no behavioral issues with her. She's compliant, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And we didn't realize either that even though she was technically an only child, she had been raised around other half siblings or, a person that she believed was her father that didn't have rights to her. And so there were additional losses that we didn't realize were there for her, and so here she is wondering, she's so young and can't understand, why can't I be around these people that I call my brothers and sisters? Why can't I be around this person that I call dad? Because that was, who she knew. But of course, due to complications of the system, couldn't actually take her in because they didn't have legal rights to her. So there was a lot of sadness there with that case. And I think that because of all the loss that she was dealing with, the only way that she knew how to handle that was to dig in her heels and try to take control and basically, tell us in a 4-year-old way, screw you, I'm going to do what I want. So.
That's always so much fun.
Yeah.
Our very first placement, the workers, and we've been told, to watch for code words, right? Watch for that code language. You're going to hear some interesting ways of saying things like, kid has challenging behavior. And when the worker when they handed us our certificate to say that we were now licensed foster parents, at that moment she said, now I want to talk to you about a couple kids. And the very first thing she says, they're pretty rambunctious. Like, whoa, hang on. If you're going to start with that word, what exponent do I need to put on it to know what the truth is? And after she came back I think it was the next month, for her first visit, the month out visit. And she says, wow, these kids have really slowed down. She said, the last time I saw them at their last placement, when I walked in, they were running, jumping up on top of the table, run across the table and jump off the table. And I'm like, oh, so that's what you mean by rambunctious. Now I understand. So yeah, if you are thinking about getting into foster care, just know that keywords are there for a reason. Know what they're saying and just be prepared to deal with a little bit more than what maybe it's advertised as, because it is difficult. Don't get me wrong. It was difficult to get kids not to be the kids who want to run and jump on and off the table, but it's worth it once you teach them a handful of things like, hey, this is a safe place where you don't have to act wild just to have control.
Yeah.
It's taken a lot of time for some of those kids to learn that too, but that's part of why it makes it worth it, because once they actually learn that, it changes so much of their life.
Yeah. And there's absolutely no way for a caseworker or anyone to be able to predict how a child is going to respond once they're removed from, the only environment they've ever known and be placed in a completely different environment. There's no way to predict how they're going to act or respond to that.
Oh, yeah. I'm a little bit of a brain science nerd myself. And so when I see those things happening, and it's like, oh, yeah, this kid's only how old? You don't know if when their amygdala spikes, are they going to be fight, flight, freeze, or one of the other handful of ones they've come up with to add to that list now? How do they respond in their survival mode? Because that's usually what those behaviors are. It's that survival mode kicking in.
Absolutely.
And if you can see that and recognize that, it's not so big of a deal with the kids a little bit rambunctious.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, we have some baby noises, but we're just going to have to deal with that today. I like her. She's cute, and I think the baby noises are cute, so I leave them in. It's way too much work to edit that out, so y'all get to hear the noises we hear as we do this.
She's very cute.
Thank you.
Yeah, she's pretty sweet, too, and that makes it even easier because, cute and sweet's a good combination for a little girl.
Yes, it is. But I mean, we have found that structure, the creating a schedule, so that a child knows, okay, I get up, I do this, I do that, and then we're going to do this. You know, and they know, and I mean, we had some kiddos that you could not deviate from that structured schedule. And if you did, oh, buddy, you were in trouble. You know, but every child is different, you know, and every case is different. Do you think you will maybe try again with the system, or are you done?
You know, I don't know. I'm thinking only God knows the answer to that question. Right now in our county, we have an Isaiah 117 house being built. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization or not, but they provide a place for kids to go while they're waiting on a placement so that they don't have to stay in the DCS office in a cubicle or in a conference room or things like that. And they provide them with a meal and, you know, if they need to take a shower, they can take a shower there and so forth before transitioning to a placement. So my husband and I are hoping to be more involved with that organization. So maybe being involved in the foster care community support in a little bit different way than necessarily taking kids into our home. But we just had a baby of our own, our first child. So that's really our focus at home right now. But definitely my heart is still involved in foster care. And every Christmas, we usually adopt a foster child to provide gifts for at Christmas. So I know that in some way, shape, or form, I'll always be connected to the foster care community and supporting foster parents and the system, even if I don't ever actually go back and become a foster parent myself.
Okay, you said an Isaiah 118 house. Is that what you mentioned?
117. Close. Yeah.
I was close. You know, I grew up in a fundamentalist church. You'd think I'd be able to remember those verses better. People will be mad at me if they see me messing that up. I've never heard of that organization before. Can you tell me a little bit about that? That sounds fairly interesting to me.
Yeah, so they have homes in the Southeast. Where I'm at is they're building a home in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, right now. And I think they started, I can't remember what the town they started in Tennessee, but it was a rural town. And the idea behind it was that, you know, if you get a placement at 3 a.m., say, for example, maybe even a baby, you may not have anything for that baby. You may not have diapers. You may not have wipes and so it provides a way to reduce stress on the foster parents of having to go run out and buy all of those things. They're able to set parents up with some of those initial, you know, materials and things that they need. And also provides a home where kids can go to, you know, if they are taken maybe in the middle of the night, then they can get some sleep. The foster parents can be contacted the next day. They can, you know, receive, if they have lice, they can treat the kids for lice before putting them in the new placement. There's all kinds of different things that they do, but just trying to ease the trauma of the transition of when you first come into custody is really what their focus is on. And so they have different volunteers that come and staff the house or come and bring. So right now, since they don't have the home in our community, what they're doing is they're bringing fast food meals like to the office. They also do different things for the caseworkers. So they may come and bring them coffee one day and just show them some appreciation and love, you know, and support, because that's a hard role as well. So they do a variety of different things like that.
I mean, that's really amazing. You know, I think every community could use something like that for our children, because I can't tell you the emails and the posts that I see. These kids are sleeping in the office tonight. There's no place for them to go. The social worker is staying with them, you know, and they might not even have a cot. They might just have a blanket and a pillow and have to lay on this dirty carpeted floor. And how humiliating is that? You're taken from your home. You're taken from the people who you love, regardless of what's going on in that situation. Children always love their parents, whether they're starved, abused, neglected, whatever. That's their family. That's their normal. That's what they know. That's what they love. You take them from that and tell them, no, you can't be here, but I have no place for you. How degrading.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, every community could use something like that. I mean, that it would be just amazingly wonderful. So I think that's so great that that's coming to your community for these kids, because our kids need it. All kids need it. All kids deserve some dignity.
Right. And that was actually our first placement. We only had him for a weekend. He was kind of in a transition situation and had, he couldn't be placed with other children. So that really cut out, obviously, a lot of foster homes that they could have placed him in. And that was the phone call I got on a Friday was, I just, you don't have to take this kid, but I want you to know that he's going to sleep on the floor of the office if nobody takes him in. And here's the situation, and he's kind of high risk, and we can't have him around other children. And I said, it's okay. I said, you can bring him over. So he stayed with us for the weekend and, just kind of hung out and put puzzles together and watched some TV and did different kid things. And then he was on to kind of his next place. But that was going to be his reality, really, if we didn't take him in that weekend.
Oh, absolutely. We have been there too. We take young ones, to keep our birth order because that works for us. But we also, our wheelhouse is addicted children. So we take in the addicted babies. We've had children that were just, being drugged to be complicit by their parents. But, that's how we ended up with our first teen. And we had said that we were never going to take teens. But, we got that phone call and they said, hey, we have nowhere for this child. If you don't, can you at least take him for the weekend until we can find something out? Because if you don't, we're going to have to place him in Boys Town, which is basically a juvenile detention center. What kid deserves that? I mean, and so I was like, okay, I can do the weekend, but, only the weekend. And then, of course, the weekend passed and, we have no place. So, he's going to have to go there. It's either that or, a hospital, detention center. And it's like, how can you send a kid knowing that's what's going to happen? And so we ended up keeping him and come to find out there was a lot of issues that we were not told. Sure. And at 6 weeks worth of placement, we were the longest placement this child had ever had. And he had been in several homes.
Wow.
And it really was an experience. And we did have to abruptly disrupt. There were some extreme safety concerns. And that's the only time that we have ever had to abruptly disrupt. But still, even with the situation that was going on, it was heartbreaking. And we didn't know what to do. And we couldn't get a whole lot of help. And it was to the point where our biological children were about ready to do things that they shouldn't do to protect mom.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are hard situations for us to have to figure out how to deal with and to work through because, number one, did this kid make some mistakes? Yeah, he made some mistakes. His biggest mistake was thinking that he could buck up to a woman who dealt with a lot bigger, badder people in her life than he was. And both of my boys were making the mistake of assuming that mom needed their help because, quite frankly, my wife doesn't look like she's going to, she could take your head off, but she had a rough childhood. She knows how to handle herself. But, all those situations come about because somebody else put a kid through some heavy trauma and he's making trauma decisions that are going to turn out to be bad for all these people involved. So it was a super difficult situation to sit through, but, as we sit back and we try and decide, are we making the right decisions? Are we deciding the right thing for this kid? And that one I'm certain we did.
Yeah.
We did end up having a family member who stepped up and took him in. And so he went to a family placement, and that was a good thing for him. But, we struggle through these things, and we watch how the whole system treats everybody. And it doesn't seem fair sometimes to the bio parents, sometimes to the, adoptive or foster parents. It's definitely rarely seems very fair to the kids. How was that like for you guys as you went through your journey? Did you see those parts? Did that play a part in you guys deciding to step back from the role of actual foster parent? Or was that something that you learned to work your way through?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, is the question kind of about like system complications that we saw?
Yeah, I mean, is the system complications, is that part of your decision to step back for a little while? Or, oh yeah, before I forget, congratulations on the new baby. You mentioned that. We kind of stepped right from one topic to another, and, that could very well be a reason why you've stepped back as well. So, what is, did the difficulties and complications in that play a role in that decision? Or was it something else?
Really what happened with my first husband was he decided that he didn't want to be married anymore during our last foster placement of 2 children. So that was a complete shock to me. I didn't know that my marriage was headed down that road. And we ended up disrupting that placement because neither one of us could really be with them and parent them on our own financially and so forth. We would have had to obviously rewrite the whole home study and show that we could have afforded our bills and those types of things. And I ended up taking in roommates to be able to pay my mortgage. So much, obviously, transition and things that happen when you go through divorce. So that is what ended the foster parent journey really for us at that time. And it was very unfortunate because I felt very bad about that additional trauma that added to those children and that additional disruption. We weren't allowed to tell them that we were getting a divorce, so they were somewhat in the dark about why they were being moved. They just knew that that there were some transitions happening in our family was essentially kind of what they were told. And they were elementary school aged. And then they went to another, I guess, pre-adoptive type placement and I maintained a little bit of contact with them after they left, but then kind of eventually lost contact.
Okay. Yeah. And that sudden unexpected divorce is a complicating factor, I would imagine.
Yes, absolutely.
I fortunately have managed to make Amanda put up with me for, it's been a little over 20 years now that she's been putting up with me. And I think she has me well enough trained that I don't have to worry about that anytime soon, because she doesn't want to spend 2 decades retraining another guy. So,
well, congratulations on you guys.
But yeah, wow, I can't even imagine going through that. Even on the best of days, I can't imagine how you walk through that. That has to be like one of those most difficult. I mean, you're losing a relationship with a husband and with kids.
Right. Yeah. Essentially, I went from a family of 4 to being by myself. And it was very hard. It was devastating. I only got through it by the grace of God, and because I clung to my faith a lot and my support system, my church at the time, just different people rallied around and loved me through it, in spite of all the messiness that I experienced. And I just had to really just trust that that things were going to be okay. And so life, that was, back in 2015. So life is a lot different now, and I've had a lot of healing, and I was able to get remarried and so forth in 2020. So life is much different, and life is good now. And so I'm thankful for all of the hard things that I've been through that have caused me to be a better person. I think it's interesting, though, because even through the divorce process, you talk about the system and how things affected us. One of the things that my ex told me was that he never really felt like he was able to fully process through the loss of our first foster placement. And I think that had a profound impact on us that, possibly we didn't fully recover from it. I wouldn't blame that for the divorce. I think there were a multitude of different factors that went into that, and, individually and as a couple. But that was really a loss that we weren't prepared for, and B, didn't know how to deal with, because how do you help someone who has lost a child, 2 children that weren't really theirs, in the first place. And then just that sense of unknowing and losing that connection, not knowing, are those children okay? Whatever happened to them, to this day, we don't know. So that's a hard piece sometimes of foster care that happens.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Cause Amanda had to step out with baby girl cause she's a little bit upset right now, but you're speaking about part of our story in just a slightly different angle. We lost our oldest daughter it's been 7 years now that we lost her. And one of those things you learn through that process is after losing a child, divorce is really common.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that kind of grief and is so very difficult to handle, you know, especially, you know, being, you know, kids who, you know, in your experience, kids who you guys were actually considering the adoption, you know, these kids could very well become part of your family. And anybody who's been down that road understands that, as you know, these kids may still be at legal risk. They may still go back to the, you know, their family. They may or may not. And you know that you're supposed to guard your heart, but how well do we guard our hearts in those moments?
Yeah, it's pretty much impossible to do that. You know, to fully love somebody, you have to open yourself up, and you're opening yourself up to potentially be hurt. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people away from foster care. They'll say things like, oh, I could never send them back, you know, and there's a beauty in the pain sometimes. It's just hard to explain.
There is always a beauty in the pain, you know, and that's one of the lessons that I try and give to as many people I find that need it, is that if we could walk through the loss of a child and I can find a way to bring some beauty out of that, you can find beauty in any pain. I promise you, it's there. And if you can share that beauty with the world, that makes the pain have some meaning. It's one of the few things that makes, because I'm going to tell you something, that idea that pain heals all wounds is a lie. It is a dirty, rotten lie. It does not heal all wounds. It makes them a little bit easier to get up every morning and breathe. Mm-hmm. But the only thing I've found that even feels close to healing is to be able to come to the place where that pain is something where you can take the lessons you've learned and help others go through their hard times with your experience. So, you know, and I'm just curious if perhaps is that part of what you're doing with your podcast? Is that related at all, or is that just an area of interest for you and that's why you went there?
Yeah, I mean, I think in my first episode, I talk about some of the things that we're talking about now. I talk about losing my foster children. I talk about going through the divorce process. I talk about how my faith was shaped and impacted by those different things. I talk about being very conscientious and wanting to do the right thing. And I think have always had somewhat of a bent towards anxiety. So I understand it. And that's, you know, part of producing the podcast, I think is therapeutic. It is that healing process. It's what would younger Carrie have needed to heal? And when I say younger Carrie, it may be just Carrie 5 to 10 years ago. You know, I did a show on hope for the not yet mothers, I think is what I called it. And it was before I became pregnant, just thinking about being older and that process and how I just recorded different people in their story of becoming a family. Some of them were pregnancy, some were adoption. And so it was just, you know, sending out encouraging messages, I think, that I wish that I had. So that is a part of it.
Well, that's awesome that you're able to use some of your own experiences like that, because I think that's where we really can create meaning in our lives out of the hard things. And that's really the only thing we can do with them that's worthwhile, because most of the rest of the people in this world who can't figure out how to do that end up finding some sort of negative coping mechanism, some way to numb the pain, some way to push it away and not walk through it and experience it. And, you know, lest I sound like I'm too high on my high horse over here, I have been that guy. There's a reason why I can tell you I have not had a drink in 5 years, 3 months, and 20 days as of this recording, because I know when the last one was. I had my numbing mechanisms. I did my own stupid stuff for a while because I did not know how to handle that kind of pain. So the fact that you're using some of your own difficulties to help people out is amazing. That's just truly amazing. I also wanted to ask another question here, because you mentioned a couple times how your faith has been part of your journey. Is that part of your reason to foster and adopt? Because, you know, I know that one of the things I always said was, you know, because I came out of a church that I felt was spiritually abusive for me, whether they intended it that way or not, that's what I came out of it feeling like I had experienced. And so I was a little bit self-righteous about religious folks. I mean, and by that, I mean probably a lot. And I was on my own high horse for a good long while. Amanda laughs at me because she knows the truth, but I remember listening to an episode, if you remember Dr. James Dobson, when he had a radio program, right? And he had an episode where he's talking about how the American foster system at the time, he said if one family out of every third church would adopt a kid out of the foster system today, they would empty the system. And I sat back going, yeah. So what are all you supposedly holy people doing? Yeah, I had my little self-righteous moment there, and this little voice in the back of my mind's like, what you doing, a-hole? Well, how do you think you're so cool? And that was really that for me, that was a crux of how I started thinking through that process. For Amanda, it was a little bit different, but how did your faith play into your family's decision to start helping kids?
I think that understanding from my spiritual Christian faith perspective that I've been adopted into God's family, and it wasn't anything that I did. It was just, something that God did for me. And so as a result, just wanting to extend that to someone else, to a child, to say like, okay, you can be a part of my family and you don't have to earn your way in here. There's not a test. It's just because we love you and we've been loved. And so we want to give that love to somebody else, and that sense of family and community and support to you. I think I get a little frustrated sometimes with some of the language in Christian circles about foster children being orphans and, they're modern day orphans. And that really rubs me the wrong way. And sorry if this is a side tangent, but, they're not orphans. They do have a biological family oftentimes. I mean, occasionally children in the foster care system may have lost both parents, but I would say that, and you could speak from your experience, that's probably relatively rare. They typically have one or both parents, or they have some kind of relative, situation that's caring for them. So they're not orphans in that sense of like a child in Africa where their parents have died of AIDS. But at the same time, I think we do have a calling or responsibility as Christians to care for those who are in dire situations, not just children in the foster care system, but people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, people who are in a really low place in prison, people that have had a rough life, people that are homeless. It's our job and our calling to look out for other people and to love them the way that Jesus would want us to. So that's part of my faith story and belief system.
Well, I would agree with you pretty heartily on most of that, because I look back and having come out of a religious tradition where I felt like, that whole high and mighty super religious, like we're the only ones going to heaven, all the rest of y'all are going to hell kind of mentality. At least that's what I took out of it. Right. And I look back and when I read that book, do you ever notice who Jesus hangs out with and who he doesn't like? The biggest problems he had was from those high and mighty religious folks that thought they were the only ones and then everybody else was horrible. And then he hung out with a lot of prostitutes and thieves and a lot of what would be considered today the modern day kind of dregs of society would be the real model that we have. And so I oftentimes look at that and go, I think a lot of people have the wrong view of that. That idea of being adopted through grace, because of nothing I did on my own. And if you want to take that to its logical extent, now, I'm not going to argue theology with anybody, but, the whole idea of original sin, where the thing that we carry within us from the beginning. And so through no fault of our own, we were born because we were born of a family that started out with problems and sin and difficulty, and we ended up still adopted through that hard place into the family of God. And so I look at that and I go, man, there's some real parallels to draw here. And that's why I feel that this whole adoption journey that we have been on and the foster care journey that we have been on feels like a true calling. And the longer we have done it, the more and more I feel like that calling is really a part of my purpose for being here on this earth. It's not to take kids away from people, but to provide safe places for kids to begin a little bit of healing. And I think that's the safest way for anybody to come into this journey, is to come with that mindset.
Yeah. And not everybody's in a place to be a foster parent, but they can all support foster parents or support their local agency, whatever that looks like. There's just so many different ways, whether it's bringing a meal to foster parents that whether it's, donating your, gently used clothing to somebody who takes in children. Just so many different options and availability to help.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, respite. We talked with one mom, and her schedule was so crazy with her children. She had actually found someone that could drive her children to like sports and drop them off, or appointments that weren't necessarily an appointment where she needed to be there. And she had found that support. And I was like, holy cow, if I had that would be amazing. If I had someone that could take away at least one therapy trip a week for me. There's so many things that can be done. You don't have to be a foster home. Not everybody's equipped for that. Not everybody can handle that. And the thing is one of the things that gets me is, so many people, oh, I couldn't do that. I couldn't love a child and give them back.
Mm-hmm.
I would just fall so in love. And I'm like, that's what they need. They need somebody who will fall in love, that will take the time to fall in love and grieve when they leave, because they've made such wonderful progress.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been part of our story as we've looked at it, because, and as somebody who's been a foster parent, you've probably heard a lot of those statements that, the things like,
absolutely.
Yeah. And it just makes makes your insides crawl a little bit. I don't know about you, but for me, it does. Because I think the backhanded compliment there is that, oh yeah, I could never do that. I could never let him go. I'm glad but you can. Like I would love him too much. I have too much in my heart. But you can do that. You must not. I'm like, no. We're willing to walk through the pain too.
Yeah. Yeah. We convince ourselves all the time that there's things that we can't do that we actually can do.
Amen to that.
Absolutely. And being a foster parent for how many years now?
I don't
going on know. 13?
13 going on 14 or 14.
Yeah, it's
been a lot.
It's been a learning process. We have done a lot of things that I did not think I could do.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a lot of cases where we had to do a lot of hard things. And we've had to let go of many children that we would have loved to have forever.
Sure.
But they went on to better places where they were supposed to be with family, because family is so important. If you can keep that connection for a child, it is the best thing that you can do for them. Because I've been down that road. I was that kid. I should have been in the system. I needed someone to care enough for me. And that's how I make my decisions, is I didn't get that. So every kid that walks through my door gets that. I don't care if it's a foster kid. I don't care if it's one of my kids' friends. If you walk through my door, you're mine, and I'm going to treat you accordingly. And I think all children need that. They need that stability. They need that person. They need that constant, someone that they can trust, that no matter what happens, no matter what they've done, no matter if they stole $20 from somebody at school, or, they came home late, or whatever, they need to know that there's somebody that's going to be there to care for them. And I think that's what we need to do as adults. We need to be taking care of our children, because one day they're going to take care of us.
Hopefully.
Mm-hmm. I'm hoping 1 out of the 8 will.
That's one of my goals, is to make certain that one of our kids is successful enough to put us in a retirement home that doesn't beat us too often.
Goals, you got to have them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm leaning towards the oldest now, because he's an LPN, so he'll have some inside knowledge, right? And right now, nurses get paid ridiculous money. And so I keep telling him, you need to be putting some money away for me later, bud. You need to be taking care of me, because I'm preparing for this. So you just be ready to take care of mom and dad here in a few years. I don't know if that's going to work that way or not.
We'll see.
But yeah, as Amanda's talking about, the way that you fall in love with some of these kids. I mean, on my left arm, I have all of my kids tattooed around a family tree. if you look across my chest, there's a handful of kids there as well that made that connection that are also on that wall of tattoos because you love them enough.
And they're no longer with us.
Yeah.
I have tattoos for almost all of my placements because my placements have left marks on my heart. They will never be forgotten. I think about them often. I pray for them. I hope they're still doing well. We don't get to see the majority of them, but we do get to see a few through Facebook. A lot of times parents don't want to keep that connection after their children are home. They don't want to be reminded of the worst
Sure.
of their lives because as a parent, that is the worst thing. The worst thing other than losing your child to death. That is the worst thing is not being able to be a parent, losing your children and not having access to them. I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we say we couldn't. I guess you probably could, but nobody is willing to do it voluntarily because it's so very difficult to even imagine what that's like. And that's been an informative part of some of our decisions as well as foster parents is knowing that that's what their bio family's going through, right? That's what their bio mom is dealing with, and bio dad maybe. One or both of them is struggling through that, and so it's an interesting part of this experience to deal with the biological mom and dad, because sometimes they're horrible human beings, but most of the time, and I mean most of the time, they're just a normal human who's going through something hard. And this is a real complicating factor on top of it. So as foster parents, sometimes it's difficult to keep that in the fore of your mind, but it's the best thing for the kids. So that's what we need to do.
Right. And oftentimes those parents have had their own trauma, and it's essentially like generational trauma that's being passed down, from one to the other.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That generational trauma. We've had several kids in our home who we've talked to, some of the police officers in the area who've maybe been around for a minute who are like, oh yeah, I remember when her mom was in foster care. And
Wow.
go, wait, what? Okay. So that this is a generational problem for sure. We've seen it in our own little bitty town out here in rural Missouri. And I know that as I talk to people who say they have the same thing everywhere, that's a real problem, is the generational side of this.
Yeah.
So since you're the one with the real training and expertise here, how do we solve generational trauma?
Wow. That's a huge question. And I look at it. I look at it with the clients that I work with, that some of them have been in really hard places and they broke that cycle. They came from an abusive situation, but they didn't abuse their kids, or they came from a situation of neglect, but now they're caring and very loving and involved in their children's lives. And I think about that often. What is that resiliency piece? And I think that, you two are a part of it. You're part of that resiliency piece of, if there's something that we don't get from our parents, sometimes we can get that from a teacher, from a foster parent, from a friend's parent, from, somebody that really comes in and loves us in a deep, valuable way, or shows us some discipline, in a healthy way, who shows us that they're invested and they're involved, that we matter, that we're valuable. And so even if somebody doesn't get that from their family system, there is a resiliency sometimes that can come from outside that family system that causes that cycle to break, and for them to be able to have had a rough childhood and still have a good and healthy adulthood. And it's absolutely amazing whenever you see it, because sometimes I look at some of my clients and I think, oh my goodness, like how are you even here living a productive adult life? Like you're amazing that you're able to do the things that you've done and not ended up in a situation where you were homeless, or a situation where you were seriously suicidal, addicted, those types of things. So, yeah.
Well, now that we have solved generational trauma,
in 5 minutes.
See, that's all we need to do. We'll change the world.
I have to interject because it took me way longer than 5 minutes to break that. Yeah. It's a lifelong commitment. Mm-hmm. It's it's an ongoing choice. Because sometimes the road gets really hard, and there's still things that will drop you down to your knees.
Yeah, it's really difficult for most people to break those generational cycles like that. And so I don't know that we'll ever get to that place in life where it's simple and easy to put the pieces together. But conversations like this hopefully help people find their way through that difficulty. And that's what we truly hope with this.
Yeah.
So, Carrie, I want to thank you for coming in and telling your story today, because experience like this is invaluable. Knowledge like you have is invaluable. And, you have been through the ringer. You have been through the hard stuff and come out the other side. Not only just survived it, but you're come out the other side swinging for the fences, trying to help people in your way. And so I'm just always amazed when I see people go through hard times and come out trying to make the world better still. Not bitter and angry, but still struggling towards better. So thank you so much for your time and your story today.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your show, and thank you for just bringing a voice and a light to just a very important issue in our nation of foster care.
Thank you so much. Okay, Foster Care Nation, thank you for listening to Carrie's story. Now take her knowledge and wisdom to heart so you can create love and healing in your family and community. Be sure to come back next week. We have new episodes every Tuesday. If you would like to share your story as a guest, you can reach us at jason@fostercarenation.com. You can connect with other like-minded people on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. And don't forget, we have an account over at Buy Me a Coffee. It's like a virtual tip jar where you can help us fund our mission for as little or as much as you want. It's at buymeacoffee.com/fostercare. The links to everything are in the show notes on your podcast player or at fostercarenation.com. And as always,
You are so super awesome. I think you guys so cool. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Unparalleled Studios.